Do I even care about the abolishing time discourse? Now, this is so like edge case in Twitter. I feel like I put that on there on my on in the stream title as like a fugue state, you know? The what now? This is one of those things where it's like there's a good idea at the core of it, but then much in the same way that they do to everything else, it gets kind of like poorly expressed, defined, and advocated for by teenagers online. You know, this is very common with anything related to anarchism. I feel like we keep running into this. Like, you know how a bunch of people said abolish police, and then it turns out that like obviously you can't literally just abolish the police. Like, maybe you can build a society without them, but you can't just get rid of them now and expect things to function. That's not how that works, you know? And likewise with prisons, you know? Like, abolish prisons, okay, then what do we do? And then it's like, well, and usually what a lot of people mean when they say this stuff is they mean, like, critical reform of, right? Like, that's usually what people mean when they say abolish X or Y. They mean critical reform of. I feel like that's kind of a rhetorical misstep. You're not going to get public support behind an idea that nominally means something other than what it means. You know, like, I understand there's always going to be a little bit of fluidity when it comes to slogans and catchphrases, because you can't expect everything to be perfectly coherent and semantically correct when you're boiling it down to a single sentence. Like, there's always going to be some muddling there, but yeah. Abolish time. Let us be free from the boring drudgery of work and capitalism that time makes possible. Every cock is a cop. Every clock is a cop. We call for the complete and total abolition of time itself. We call for a free life unstructured by the inhuman rigidity of time and the police, prisons, and other methods of control it necessitates. No more dead time, only party time. Is this real? It's real. A very serious political prescription made by very serious people. Yeah, well, I'm convinced, yeah. The frustrating thing is there is like an underlying legitimacy here. Remember that pamphlet that came out from one of the like Smithsonians where it was like it said something like hard work is white supremacy. Let me find that thing. Hold on. Smithsonian pamphlet, work ethic white supremacy. Let me see if I can find that. Here we go. So I remember covering this way back, you know, 4 years ago almost. Smithsonian Institute explains that rationality and hard work are racist. Let me see the pamphlet here. This was made into a pamphlet, so this is just an image from online, but it was like they had a pamphlet. Oh, here we go. Here's the pamphlet form. Nice. It shows more too. Aspects and assumptions of white culture and whiteness in the U.S., rugged individualism, family structure, emphasis on scientific method, history, Protestant work ethic, religion, state power and authority, or status, power and authority, future, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and time! Ah, there we go, time as well. There you go. Isn't this old? Well, I just said 4 years ago. Anyway, this one bothered me as well, because, you know, like, again, there's some discourse that really should be kept to academia, you know, because to simplify the ideas is to strip them of their context and their meaning, and to have those ideas stripped of context and meaning thrown out into the public space is just begging for them to be misinterpreted. So, you know, I can't say the people who made this pamphlet aren't dumb fucks. They might be, but the real dumb move wasn't the underlying ideas, it was to put them in a pamphlet. Does that make sense? They're saying the scientific method is white culture. What the f? That's pretty racist. Okay, no. So, to be fair, though, a lot of academics really should learn how to communicate with normies. Yes. Okay, hold on. Let me try to think of like a good example here. Okay? Okay, I think I've got it. Okay? Let's imagine for a minute that there are many different ways that a human being can comfortably stand while at rest. Just like relaxing, standing, whatever. Like there's a bunch of different subtle changes in your posture, the way your feet are positioned, okay? You can imagine in your head a bunch of different poses, if you will. Now, let's imagine that all of these positions to hold yourself in are equally comfortable, all right? There's no rational reason to prefer one over the other except for your preference, you know, that's it. It's just whatever you're comfortable with, you know, but they're all equally fine, all right? Now, let's say that some of these positions in which one could stand look gayer than others. Now, imagine again in your head, I'm sure this is easy for you. You can imagine a bunch of different ways you can hold yourself at rest that come across as a bit, a little quirky, a little quirked up, a little zesty, even just a little bit, doing a bit of a JoJo pose. Okay, now imagine if there was a study and it turned out that gay men were more likely to stand in all of these positions equally, and straight men are more likely to only stand in positions that don't have any arbitrary cultural signifiers associated with homosexuality or being a fet or whatever. So gay men are more likely to just evenly stand how they want, and straight men are more likely to limit themselves to a few more conventional masculine standing poses. Does everyone follow what I'm saying so far? Okay? Now imagine if somebody did a big write-up on the ways in which our social understanding of what gayness looks like influences something as subtle and personal as the way that we stand. That'd be interesting. And I don't think what I'm describing right now is that irrational either. I think that, as a matter of fact, that what I'm saying is probably true to an extent. So, imagine you wrote that paper. Now imagine some dumb f put in a pamphlet distributed at a museum aspects and assumptions of homophobia. The way you stand might be homophobic. Do you understand how there's been a communication breakdown? And now people online are going to go, wow, the woke mob is saying even the way you stand is homophobic, And then it's like, wait, no, hold on, wait, there's more, there's, you understand? So what I just described happened like 50 times over in this pamphlet. That's what I'm saying here. Like what I just said happened here. That's what you're looking at right now. So to go over any one of these, you have a much more charitable, like much more understandable, softer usually, because it's more of a like correlative thing, statement that you can defend with research, but then it gets boiled down into this. Now, I think that the publication of this pamphlet was like a crime, okay? I'm kind of not joking. The stripping of context that happens when you take interesting information and you boil it down to this does nothing but hurt progressive and academic interests. All it does is divide people and make people argue over dumb shit. Like, it's bad. It's genuinely like, I hate it when this happens, and it happens a lot. It happens so much. Usually it's not malice. It's because the kinds of people who write articles on whether or not your sexuality affects how you stand don't touch much grass, so they don't really know how their stuff comes off outside of their academic bubble. All of their friends are hoity-toity, big glasses frame academics, lefties, who understand them and are sympathetic and charitable and blah, blah, blah. So then when you boil it down for like public access, it's like, whoa, a lot of them didn't expect that. Media training should be a component in preparing students for publishing research, is all I'm saying. Some element of media training, public framing of how this gets, worded. It's very important. This stuff gets miscommunicated very often. So, okay, now one of these is time. So aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the US. And down here you have time. Follow rigid time schedules, time viewed as a commodity. So how does this make sense? Well, first of all, abolishing time doesn't literally mean abolishing, the fourth dimension. It doesn't literally mean abolishing the track along which the space-time continuum flow. Like that, it's not, not literally. Maybe for some of you fancy pants wizards in chat, I don't work with the dark arts, but whatever you care to, that's not what it refers to in this context. I'm sorry. I know I hate to disappoint you. Okay. What they mean is that the way we've treated time socially has changed a lot over time. See, we didn't really use clocks for most of human history. Clocks in some form or another have been around for thousands of years, the sundial, for example. But in terms of like specific codified timeliness, the kind that you can only really keep track of with, a delicate and well-tuned instrument, that only came about, in all of human history relatively recently, and then only became publicly available very recently. So clocks in some form or another go back a long time, but every person always knowing what time it is exactly, that is a very recent thing. You know, that is very, very recent. You know, because it used to be clocks were like crazy expensive, and sundials vary in quality, access, and accuracy. And, you know, they only work when it's sunny and blah, blah. So you understand what I'm talking about, right? So for the most part, for most of human history, the way we would judge the time was just by the sun, of course, like morning or dawn, noon, whatever. If you take a look at historical documents, even ones as recent as the founding of America, right? Like if you, even going back to the 1800s, where clocks had existed for a while by the 1800s. Even back then, if you read documents on them talking about timekeeping, what do they say? They'll say high noon, dawn, sunset, or general terms like in the morning, in the evening, you know? They have like, a lot of their terms are antiquated today. We don't use them anymore, but there's a lot of like, general gesturing at the time that went on back then because that's what they had. And as a consequence of that, people were a lot less fiddly about time than they are now. Nowadays, time is measured down to a digital atomic level. So as long as you have readily available technology, the time is always known to you all the time. And as a consequence of that, everyone expects you to always be kept with the time. Does that make sense? So nowadays, it's possible for you to have like online appointments that are scheduled at a specific time. And if you're late by 1 minute, you can miss out on that, you know? Which is like, would that have been possible 200 years ago? Apart from the online thing, I mean, an appointment that you can miss by being a minute or two late. And the answer is probably not, no. Because nobody ever would have said, you have to have this appointment at this minute. Nobody knew the minute, you know? You would just show up at some point in like a range, you know, on the morn of this day or near noon or whatever. Usually meaning that events, scheduling, coordination, everything were fuzzy and more of a general vibe than they were a specific numerically determinable point in time. So isn't there something kind of nice about that? I can see the appeal. We live by the clock these days, and in many cases, the hyper fastidious, exacting expectation that everyone be perfectly on the clock all the time is a capitalist profit-seeking thing. A lot of that process is a matter of making sure that our economy and our society runs very efficiently. On the other hand, that efficiency isn't exactly a bad thing. Can you imagine bus schedules or train schedules or, I don't know, anything in modern society without exacting timekeeping? Nothing digital would work because digital interactions obviously require precise timekeeping. So, you know, that wouldn't be possible. The telecommunications network wouldn't be possible. A lot of stuff requires absolutely perfect timekeeping. GPS wouldn't work. Yeah, like much of modern society wouldn't work. Here's the straw, or sorry, not the straw man, the opposite. Here's the steel man of time abolition, okay? I think that on a social level, so we're not talking about like technological changes here. We're just talking about social changes, what we've come to expect from ourselves and from others. On a social level, a degree of inefficiency in timekeeping is sometimes not only acceptable but desirable because it alleviates anxiety, because it means that our interactions feel a little bit more authentic and impromptu rather than everything being codified the way a machine would. We aren't machines. We keep time with machines, but if we live by time as machines do, we're losing something human about ourselves. And again, that doesn't mean that trains and planes and everything shouldn't have timekeeping. It just means that socially, you know, it might be a good idea for people to be a little more lenient with these ideas. Now, I think that in a practical sense, we actually do this, you know? In a practical sense, we often have loose expectations when it comes to like the time that our friends arrive for socializing, or I'll be online around so-and-so time, you know? Time abolition, I think, is about trying to free humans from a mindset where we are bound to a machine-like adherence to timekeeping. Does that make sense? Have I done a good job of explaining like the steel man here, the version of it that I agree with, that I think there is some social utility in understanding that there are some things for which precise timekeeping is desirable and there are some things that it is not desirable for. I think a good example of this would be in a lot of cases, the extremely strict and precise timekeeping of when people clock in and out of work. That's like a very good example because, it used to be when you clock into work at the factory, there's a time card that you stamp. And, that feature of factory work was satirized and criticized heavily back in the day as a very machine-like, a very like inhuman process. And we still do it today, of course. We just don't need time cards, right? We have other processes by which we make sure people arrive to work on time. If you work an office job, is it that big of a deal if you arrive 10 minutes late in a lot of cases? I'm willing to bet no, considering the fact that most office jobs are at least 50% bullshit. So the insistence on timeliness there is not about efficiency in the workplace, is it? Because whether or not you arrive 10 minutes late for a job where you're going to be in the office for 8 hours, but you have 4 hours of work to do, the 10 minutes late thing, that's not about efficiency. It's about obedience and discipline. It's about making a machine of you. It's about making you as predictable and reliable as the computers that effortlessly keep time, because that's how they're built to. It does, nothing changes whether or not you're 10 minutes late, in some cases, not in all cases, like service work, but in some cases it doesn't change. When this pamphlet says that these expectations surrounding time are components of white supremacy in the US, they're referring to something, well, they're referring to a lot of things, but an element of this is something that I've heard referred to as island time, where there's an association that some island nations, and I think a lot of this is a stereotype, I don't know how much of this is true, but I'm talking about like cultural associations, like the Caribbean or whatever, they tend to be a lot more lax when it comes to specific timekeeping because there's more of a, I don't want to say a looser attitude towards work. I mean, they work really hard over there. They just have, I guess, a bit more social lenience in how they approach timekeeping as it relates to that work. Does that track? Does that make sense? Okay. Maybe we'd all be a little bit better rested, feel a little bit more human, a little bit more personable, a little more sociable if we felt less kept by the clock. I don't know. That is my steel man. Now, obviously, my steel man has very little to do with this paper, which is concerned more with being edgy and contrarian than it is in actually communicating ideas. Like, this is just meant to rabble-rouse. It will not be understood or appreciated by anyone but people who already agree with the premise. And also, I mean, I'll just say it, the average person who wants time abolition could not advocate for it or defend it on any level to anybody because they don't fully understand the idea themselves. Maybe some of them have more radical aspirations than me. I don't think they've fully thought it through in a lot of cases. I've seen people on Twitter try desperately to explain what it means, and usually they can't explain it because they don't. It's a vibe. But I don't think it's just a vibe. I think there is a valid sociological critique of overly fastidious timeliness in some social situations. Again, not all. I know that in the YouTube comments, some people are going to say like, don't you know planes wouldn't work without that? Like, I know there are going to be people like that, but hopefully a lot of people get it. Okay, nice. Yeah, good. Yes. It's already happening in chat. Modern society is built off accurate timekeeping, having appointments in specific minutes. Okay, Sarahkin, just rewatch the bit. Even Marx talked about this. It's only a couple paragraphs. Rereading my technological and historical excerpts have led me to the conclusion that aside from the invention of gunpowder, the compass, and printing, those necessary prerequisites of bourgeois progress, the two material bases upon which the preparatory work for mechanized industry in the sphere of manufacturing was done between the 16th and mid-18th century, i.e. the period during which the manufacturing evolved from a handicraft to big industry proper, were the clock and the mill, both inherited from antiquity. The clock was the first automatic device to be used for practical purposes. The whole theory, the production of regular motion evolved. Germanistic clockmaking is scientific from the development of the clock. Nor can there be any doubt that it was the clock which in the 18th century first suggested the application of automatic devices. Historically, yes. Yes, I am exactly like Marx in every way. That is true. Spinny things are pretty. That is true. Vaush, while I mostly agree with you, there are still significant benefits to having precise times more than just planes and buses. Doctors, for instance, could see more patients if they all show up at precise and expected times. Okay. I said in a social sense. I don't, if you're thinking in your head at this exact moment, what about this thing where clocks are helpful? And I didn't specifically say that is a thing that we should abolish the clock on or whatever. You should assume I would then say, because you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Yes, there is a value in timeliness. Though actually, in fairness, I think you could reasonably argue that there has been a negative correlation there. Modern doctors' offices operate like factories. You go in, you have a set length of time, very quick, very dat. It used to be doctors had much more of an interpersonal relationship with you. Now, obviously, there are reasons for things to be kept efficient and timely. You know, we've got a lot of people to serve, but aren't there a lot of correlative traits here? Like, aren't there a lot of factors that kind of line up in a weird way? Isn't it strange that with all of our wealth and all of our prosperity, we would have a more strained relationship with doctors now than we did 50 years ago? That now everything has to be kept into a crunch, even though the average person in society is healthier than they were then? Like, what? Why? Why is that? And why is it, you know, that everything is so damned expensive? Why is it that an appointment is proportionally so expensive today, even though you spend less time talking to the doctor than you would have in a previous visit? I remember what my doctor's checkups were like even back when I was a kid. Things have gotten worse. I think that, like a lot of other places, the relationship between doctors and patients has been reduced to that of a machine. I think that there's been an effort to streamline things to the point where it's actually detrimental to our health in a lot of ways. People have persistent anxiety disorders and a lot of recurring health hiccups and issues. And a lot of this is because things are so expensive because of American healthcare. A lot of this is because, and I think this is real, and this is one of those things they don't want you talking about because it's not numerically codifiable the way that like money spent is. If you don't trust your doctor, if you feel like your doctor is just some clerk or clinic worker who looks over you for 5 minutes, has one issue they get to talk about with you, and then you're out the door, if that's your relationship with your doctor, I think that's detrimental to your health. I think you're less likely to share things with them, to develop a relationship, to have long-term correspondence that might help you get to the bottom of long-term health issues. I think a lot of people have persistent health issues that never actually get addressed because they go in, it's like, oh, these are your symptoms? Okay, try this. You know, go to your pharmacy, spend $200 on this medication, blah, blah, blah. Like, come back. You can get an appointment with me in 3 months from now. And I'm not saying any of these things would be necessarily fixed by abolishing the clock and appointments. I think appointments should be timely. But I think we're dealing with a common symptom, an attempt to make machines of men, to turn the medical process into a factory line, an assembly line, you know? Does that make sense? So maybe the issue with doctors' offices isn't the timeliness, you know, even though the doctor's always late when they have to see me. That's acceptable. You know, it's okay when the doctor's late to see you if you're ever late, you know. Maybe that's not the issue. Maybe it's another element of machine processing. Maybe it's another assembly line feature. The belief that you can efficiently streamline everything to a point where it no longer feels human. I still don't understand where white supremacy comes in with the modern concept of time. Please explain. Presumably because colonial forces imposed sort of industrial standards of timekeeping on the colonies that they controlled, meaning that there was like a mismatch in. I mean, okay, just you can get into it on your own if you want, but Google the term "colored people time" history, and you can find like there's a lot of really interesting discourse. So, like, I'm just gonna put this one forward. You know, let you stew over this one, okay? Choose a racial group in America that's been worked the hardest, okay? Really think for a second. From the 1600s to now, which racial group has worked the hardest? Right. That's what I thought. So with that in mind, why then were black people impugned for being lazy workers? By the way, they said that about black people during the slave days too. Like, the idea that black people are lazy was a commonly held sentiment by whites when blacks were slaves. Like, while they were being whipped and killed out on the cotton fields, still thought they were lazy. Why? You can look into it. It's a whole other thing. Time, dehumanization, profit motives. All three are a part of it. But I mean, if you want to get down to the fundamental there, an attempt to make machines of men. You know, I think that's the common thread here. I don't think it's even necessarily a capitalism thing. I think it's attempts to make machines of men. I think that from the timeliness to the way the doctors' offices run these days to all the way back to the plantations, we run into common tendencies like an overemphasis on the importance of timekeeping and efficiency when we try to make machines of men. Efficiency is good, but so is living our lives happily. So clearly there's some, you know, dialectic at play here. Do you believe daily routines and schedules have utility at least? Sailor Nibiru, please, you make me worry. At no point have I said daily routines or schedules are bad. I said what I said. If I didn't say daily routines and schedules are bad, okay, you weren't being snide with that comment. It's just you make me worry because I worry that whenever I say anything remotely like theory-based like this, I have to spend 8 hours like doing the caveats where I make every statement that I don't mean as well to like carve it all out, you know. No. As I said, about making machines of men. It is not bad to have a daily routine. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So you mean to say speedrunning is a capitalist? I think it's an interesting subject.